So starting on Thursday, we did have people come in and they could eat and drink inside. We asked everyone if they were up and moving around to wear a mask, which is particularly good if you're someone working in the main office and suddenly you've got someone like right next to you, and it seemed to work okay on Thursday. Yeah, and you can, and that lets you say, please pull your mask up, if you're interacting with someone, and the expectation would be that if they were moving around, they would be wearing a mask. Okay, so we'll get started on the service. All right, so I'll start the service officially. So welcome to our small group who is here. There's several people who are not here because of various health issues and health issues of friends. So that's where some of the people are, I know. So this will be the third year that I am leading worship on the Sunday that is closest to All Saints Day and All Souls Day. And in order to recognize people connected to Patchwork in various ways who have died in the last year. And this year this Sunday happens to also be Halloween. So it's kind of an interesting calendar where either you celebrate on Halloween or wait a week. So I'm going with today, and it links up with all kinds of customs and celebrations and festivals from all across the world around these few days, recognizing death and life and community. So we'll begin, as we always do, by sharing names. I'm Amy.
Bill. Theo. Laura. John. Karen. Bill.
Helen.
And we also have Erica Shipley and Helen Templeton, along with Jean and Helen's daughter Susan, and Randy Pease. So we've got a good group online too. So are there celebrations for the week? My birthday is Wednesday. I think if we do a celebration here, I'll do it next Sunday, because I won't be leading worship then and could think more clearly and enjoy it more. So that's okay. So you can sing for me next week and we'll celebrate next week. It's on Wednesday, so kind of in the middle of the week. Are there any other birthdays or anniversaries or special occasions? Okay. So I'll begin the service with some readings on grief and loss. So we'll start with Psalm 42, verses 3-8, which John translated. He'd actually translated part of it for his sister's friend who had had a miscarriage. So had partially started to translate it with that thought in mind, and then I had asked him for some scripture that related to loss and mourning, and he suggested this and said he would translate more. So, with all of that introduction, Psalm 42, 3-8. The tears of my weeping have fed me like bread by day and by night. As I pour out my soul within me, I remember these things. I am passing over with the throng. I am walking slowly and deliberately with them in the house of God. With a voice ringing out in joy and thanksgiving, the crowd reels at the pilgrim feast. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you so turbulent within me? Await God, for I shall yet give thanks to the Holy One, whose countenance is my salvation. My God, my soul is cast down within me. I will remember you from the land of Jordan, the place of crossing over the waters into a promised land of milk and honey, and from Hermon, the far-off mountain redolent with dew and cypress trees, from Mount Mizar. Deep calls unto deep at the voice of your water sluices. Your crashing waves, your rolling billows pass over me. By day, the Lord will send out loving kindness. By night, God's song shall be with me, a prayer to the God of my life. And now a poem called For Grief by John O'Donohue. When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you becomes fragile. Your thoughts make your eyes unsure, and some dead echo drags your voice down where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss. And though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. There are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks and you are thrown back onto the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well, until in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way and will find the right time to pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wound of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from the gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. And so now I'd like to remember the people with various connections to Patchwork who have died in the past year, starting November 1st of 2020 and up till today. It's a list of the people who anyone has said to me has a connection. I'm sure that there are other people that are not on my list who have connections, and there's an extra candle for those two. So I'll go down my list. Actually, I forgot. No. So the first person I wanted to recognize is named Dorothy Word, and she died on November 1st of 2020. She was a retired teacher who was connected to Patchwork back when Jane Vickers first started working in the children's program here. And she was also Black. And Jane recognizes Dorothy as someone who is foundational in building Jane's skills as a teacher and as an after-school program director. Dorothy worked with Jane to help her understand the kids that Jane was working with. And Dorothy continued to check in with Patchwork every so often until she was no longer able because she had dementia. And so she died November 1st. Frank Lewis died on December 30th, and he was one of our AARP custodians that we've had through the years. He also lived nearby, so even after he got transferred away from Patchwork, we would still see him around. He would still come in every so often. His family also lived nearby, so actually I'd pass him walking over here to Patchwork for work sometimes. Breck Brizendine died on January 13th. He also lived nearby. He was a good friend of Jane Vickers, and he was a tutor in the children's program and really cared for the kids that he tutored. And he also would stop by Patchwork every so often. Dwight Munzer died on February 11th, and he was a really good friend of Darlene's. He had volunteered in the food pantry, and he was part of the Wednesday crew, and Darlene and Dwight and got to know each other's families. But more recently, he had had a lot of health issues, so he had not been around. But I know that his death was one that Darlene would have wanted to make sure to note tonight. Helen Belleville died on March 22nd. Helen was a longtime Arts and Smarts volunteer, and she was also a retired art teacher. She had taught in Mount Vernon schools. She also shared a lot of her experience with Jane and the rest of the children's program staff. She was volunteering here when I was first working in the children's program. She also had a lot of specialized art equipment that she gave to Patchwork, and in that way increased the amount of art projects and things that the kids were doing in the children's program. She did a lot to encourage people to be artists and to be art teachers, and she also did a lot to encourage places like Patchwork that were nurturing places for kids. And I put on the table, this is one of her later pieces of art that she made, and for her 90th birthday, we had her 90th birthday party here at Patchwork, and someone gave her the Toys R Us birthday club Jeffrey Giraffe stuffed animal, and it really bothered her that the stuffed animal cannot stand up because its head is too top heavy. And it really bothered her that they would make a toy that was just so not playable. So she built this, she was 90 years old, and she built this chair for Jeffrey in her extra art room at the Rathbone. And I love it, and it's got a little hole in the back for Jeffrey's tail. So, you know, I would be 90 and using power tools to make art. So. C.C. Gerlitz died on June 17th. Don and C.C. were part of the Patchwork Worship community even before I was here the first time around. I met them a couple times when they came back to visit, but then they had moved away from this area. But after C.C.'s death, Don said that she had continued to feel like Patchwork was her church, her home church. And she was an artist, and the rainbow cloth on the table is something that she had made. Scotty Hall died on June 24th, and he was one of our morning regulars. He lived nearby, and he was one of the many people who come to Patchwork and find a community and find a caring place to belong. His sister also is a regular in the morning. Sarah Jones died on July 25th, and Sarah was a child in the children's program when I was working in the children's program. She came with her brother and sister. She was inquisitive and bright, and like all the kids, we hoped for the best for her, and unfortunately, her life went in difficult directions, and so she actually died of a drug overdose, which is a sad conclusion for someone who is not old and has always, I guess, the hope that people have promise. Ruth Harshman died on August 31st. Ruth was a grandmother who was the guardian of her grandchildren, and she brought her grandchildren here to Patchwork, to the children's program. She often stuck around, like when she dropped them off or when she was picking them up, she'd stay and chat. She volunteered in the children's program some too. She had been handed a lot of tricky cards in life, and did the absolute best that she could with everything she was handed, and loved her grandchildren very much. Maria Utley died on September 11th, and she was another grandmother who brought her grandchild, who she was the guardian for, to Patchwork. And it's been a few years since she was here and around, because she'd moved away from this neighborhood. But she was faithful in bringing her grandson to the children's program, but she also would come in the mornings sometimes. She was very generous. She always brought presents for all of us, whether we wanted them or not. And they were always a little odd, but she was always so enthusiastic to give them. And she also made a point of bringing a monthly, basically a monthly tithe to Patchwork, because she believed in who we were and what we were doing. And finally, Darlene Blagg, who died on September 11th. And I'm fairly certain that I am not the only one who is still really surprised that there's a candle for her here. So she did so much for Patchwork. She was so generous. And she was so good at finding all the ways that seeing things that were not getting done and jumping in and taking care of them, partly because it made everything flow better, but partly because she knew that was something that was helpful for her friends. So, and last year I did this service, and we were doing it only remotely by live stream, and I had, after the service was over, I left all the candles burning, and for an extra 10 minutes afterward, for if anyone wanted to just sit and kind of meditate. And the next day, Darlene came in for the food pantry, and she had been one who had sat and watched and appreciated the extra time. And so I guess I especially then think of her tonight. And that's the list that I had. I'll light another candle for anyone else who's died in the last year, whether they're connected to Patchwork or not. If you know of anyone that you want to lift up, you can lift them up now.
It's kind of an indirect connection, but just a couple weeks ago, a week ago, there was a young man who died who was the grandson of one of our regulars, named Robert. His grandson died by suicide, and it was something that Robert talked about with friends and folks around here, and so everybody really rallied around him and gathered around him to support him in his grief. So I also remember, and unfortunately I don't remember the young man's name, but I remember Robert and his grandson.
So John lifted up the grandson of one of our regulars died by suicide just a few weeks ago, and so everybody who's been here in the morning have rallied around him.
Pastor Walt Lundgren died this year, and he was active on the board here early on. And when I first got to town 28 years ago, he told me I needed to come to Patchwork, and he was great.
So Karen lifted up Walt Wongren, who was active in the very early days of Patchwork and was on Patchwork's board and is responsible for Karen being here. And he died a few months ago. Yeah. All right. So I'll read another poem on grief. It's called In Lieu of Flowers. It's by Shauna LeMay, and it starts with the note, a few years ago I read a friend's father's obituary on Facebook. His father had requested, in lieu of flowers, please take a friend or loved one out for lunch. So here's the poem. Although I love flowers very much, I won't see them when I'm gone. So, in lieu of flowers, buy a book of poetry written by someone still alive. Sit outside with a cup of tea, a glass of wine, and read it out loud by yourself or to someone silently. Spend some time with a single flower, a rose maybe. Smell it, touch the petals, really look at it. Drink a nice bottle of wine with someone you love, or champagne, and think of what John Maynard Keynes said, "My only regret in life is that I did not drink more champagne." Or what Dom Perignon said when he first tasted the stuff, "Come quickly, I am tasting stars." Take out a paint set and lay down some colors. Watch birds. Common sparrows are fine. Pigeons too. Geese are nice. Robins. In lieu of flowers, walk in the trees and watch the light fall into it. Eat an apple, a really nice big one. I hope it's crisp. Have a long soak in the bathtub with candles. Maybe some rose petals. Sit on the front stoop and watch the clouds. Have a dish of strawberry ice cream in my name. If it's winter, have a cup of hot chocolate outside for me. If it's summer, a big glass of ice water. If it's autumn, collect some leaves and press them in a book you love. I'd like that. Sit and look out a window and write down what you see. Write some things down. In lieu of flowers, I would wish for you to flower. I would wish for you to blossom, to open, to be beautiful. And then I also thought that I would take some time to just recognize some of the other in the larger scheme of things, things that have happened in the last year. It is not exactly the level of stuff from 2020, perhaps, but still there were quite a few things to sort of grieve and to recognize and to acknowledge about the past year. There's many things, but I'll start with just at this point, there are more than 700,000 Americans who are now dead from COVID-19. 5 million have died worldwide. Additional people have died because they couldn't access health care because of all the COVID patients. Still more have been disabled by the disease. And so many people's mental health has suffered also because of everything involved with this pandemic. So recognizing the war in Afghanistan, the fact that the US withdrew recently, it was a war that had been going on for almost 20 years. The over 170,000 lives lost, including almost 50,000 Afghan civilians It cost over $2 trillion. And looking at the additional collateral damage of war, more than 30,000 former combat veterans from wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have died by suicide also. Natural disasters that are linked to climate change. Just looking at the US alone, hurricanes so far in 2021 have led to 159 deaths, $69 billion in damage. There was the Western heat wave earlier this summer in the US and Canada. There were 1,260 deaths related to that. All of the wildfires, I couldn't find any listing of deaths, but at this point, what I found was there were 6.5 millions of acres have been burned just this year. And linking climate change and the need to do more about it to all of those disasters and all of those deaths. The continued concern for our own democracy. There was an attempted coup in January. This time it was unsuccessful, but we should all be mindful of how to prevent things like that and how to protect our democracy. 5 people died either shortly before, during, or after it. Many others were injured. And additionally, this year, there have been significant moves to reduce voting rights across the country, especially voting rights for non-white people. And thinking particularly of that this week with an election, national election this Tuesday. And then if there's anything else anyone would like to lift up. Otherwise, yeah, I do. Actually, yeah, that shifting back to people who have died in the last year. Elizabeth Sire has joined us online and recognizes her mother. Ruth Sire died in July. She was a community nurse who said of Patchwork, quote, "I don't really know what they do there, but they sound like good people helping people, and you're sure happy when you talk about them." And then on the kind of larger world issues, Elizabeth also lifts up the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. All right. And now I'll have one more reading, actually from today's lectionary on the end of mourning, from Isaiah 25, 6-9. "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from the earth, from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. In that day they will say, surely this is our God. We trusted in him and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. And now we'll move into just the general prayers of the people. If anyone has prayer concerns to lift up, I've got the continued prayers for health and healing and a quick recovery for Helen Templeton, who was released from the hospital on Tuesday and continues to feel better and do better. She has the gift of a visit from her daughter who lives in Canada. She has a lot of doctor's appointments and physical therapy coming up, but things are looking positive. And then continued prayers for Phyllis Grimm, who is home on oxygen, and for her dog Rusty, who needs to go make an emergency trip to the vet tomorrow, and for Jane Johansson, who is taking care of both of them, and Nils, who is taking care of Jane. So those are the two prayer concerns I had. Is there anything else?
I'll ask traveling mercies for my mother who flies to England this Tuesday to be with my sister for 6 weeks to help my sister out.
So John lifts up traveling mercies for his mother who is going to England to help John's sister out for a couple months. 6 weeks.
Prayers for our friend Sue, who had quadruple bypass surgery Friday and is doing better. Recovered.
So repeat that, his name again.
Sue.
Or her name, sorry. Sue, with quadruple bypass surgery. Sorry, the messages have been from Jane Johansson, so I was also like, oh, does she have new new updates? But so far, no. Any others?
For undocumented families that are trying to deal with our crazy, inconsistent, and unfair and crazy stuff.
So Karen lifts up undocumented people and families who have to deal with a unfair system. I guess I'll just say, for all of these things, gracious God,
Hear our prayer.
and now time for gifts. So I'll pass the bowl. I'll say today's weather is a gift. It's also a gift, speaking of the pandemic and everything going on with it, it's also a gift to have local COVID rates starting to go down, kind of the hope that possibly we are seeing the end of the worst. Hope that this all holds and stays. So it's good to have hope.
Sorry, go ahead.
Bill and I came home from walking, and there was a monarch butterfly on our chrysanthemums.
Uh-uh.
And also the penguins are
So Gail lifts up the penguins, who are wonderful, and the monarch butterfly, who was on their chrysanthemums when they came back for a walk.
It's a gift to me, the help I've received from various people. Phil helping me in the food line, and Gail and Phil gave me a ride today to save me from trick-or-treaters who might be out as I'm walking slowly with the cane.
So yeah, so Laura lifts up help from friends.
You may have read Amy's update, Patchwork update on Friday, but it was a real gift to have a family medicine resident from the Deaconess Family Medicine Residency Program help out with the health ministry this past Wednesday morning. He was taking blood pressures and talking with people about surgeries and medications and various things, and you could tell he was very good with our folks and very helpful. So that was a gift, and it's a gift that we now have this collaboration. We should be seeing a resident, coming here every Wednesday morning and helping out.
So John lifted up the Deaconess Family Medical Resident who was here on Wednesday. And is the first of many who will be here, and who was excellent and took blood pressures and talked to people. And Sean lifts up Lauren has a new job working for the Gleaner in Henderson, but watch for her name, watch for Lauren Craddock as the author of stories in the Courier, because she actually had one that appeared on the front page of the Courier this week about gas prices. So that's a good thing. Elizabeth Sire lifts up, I want to lift up everyone that's helped us recover from the storm/minor flooding we had, especially those who helped pedestrians when the lights were out. And she's in Boston. So yeah, definitely.
I would lift up our interns. They have been such wonderful students who have been so helpful and interact so well with our clients that come in for hospitality. I give them high marks. They're super students.
Yeah. Helen lifts up all of the interns that we have that we have in general. I was going to say this semester, but they've always been so good, and they're very good at interacting with everybody who's here, and are a real major help. All right. So we give God thanks for all of these things. And now we'll go to communion. So this is a bread that was one of Darlene's breads that was in her freezer. I'm sure for just in case. And tonight felt like an appropriate night to use one of her communion breads. This one was the star-shaped one with all the cinnamon. And I also have, this is always in John, and it currently has been in John and my office, if anyone ever also wants to use it. But this is also Alan's, the wine glass from Alan's, that's chipped on the edges like most of his glasses were, and that we've all shared drinks. Anyone who was over at his house would have shared drinks from it. And the marigolds, in
March of 2020, end of March of 2020.
yeah. It seems a long time and not that long at the same time that Alan has been gone. And the flowers are all from my garden. And the pumpkins, I think we've recognized, but maybe not. And all of these pumpkins were grown in Patchwork's garden, which I was really impressed that we successfully got pumpkins and the squash vine borers did not destroy them. They just crawled on them afterward. All right, so communion itself is a ritual of remembrance, a remembrance of Jesus gathering together with his disciples to share a meal. Tonight we also remember those who have died this year, some of whom have joined with us in the past in communion at this table. And we remember all the times that all of us, either here or the people who are not able to be here tonight but are normally part of our group, and the people who have started joining us online, are all together through communion. And thinking of those things, we remember that while Jesus and his disciples were eating on the night that he would be betrayed, he took the loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." Then he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it, and he said, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many." So I will give you a piece of bread, and then you can pick up, the wine is on the clear tray, and the juice is on the not clear tray. So you can come up. Karen, bread of community. John, bread of community. Laura, bread of community. Phil, bread of community. Helen, bread of community.
Thanks be to God.
Gail, bread of community. Bill, bread of community. So we're almost at the end of the service. Are there any announcements? Okay. So, we're at the end. And the people of God say,